That night, the rain poured down like a waterfall, with gusts of wind howling through the leafless trees along the empty highway. It was nearly midnight, the air was freezing, and the small town in the Midwest was shrouded in a gloomy, damp atmosphere, filled with the fury of nature. In the gray darkness and heavy rain, a lone creature slowly trudged through the dark alleys near the forest. It was a German shepherd, its once thick fur now soaked and matted with rainwater and mud. The ribs were clearly visible beneath its thin skin, and its body trembled from the cold, hunger, and exhaustion. It once had a name, but that name had faded over the months of being abandoned. Perhaps someone had loved it, had once called it Max with affection and trust. But now Max was just a forgotten shadow, a stray dog with no owner, no refuge, no familiar voice. No one knew where it came from, and no one cared where it was going. It was simply a wandering creature, appearing and disappearing in a world that had stopped caring. Each step Max took was a struggle. The cold and hunger made every movement slow and heavy. The rain stung like needles against its skin, piercing through fur that no longer had the ability to keep it warm. But the instinct to survive pushed Max to keep moving. Its wet nose lowered to the ground, sniffing around piles of tipping trash, overturned bins, and wet scraps of packaging drifting in the rain. Each sniff was a fragile hope for food, even just a small morsel or a leftover meat scent. Max no longer hoped for someone to feed it. It didn't expect gentle eyes or a dry roof over its head. The days of loneliness had taught it that the world outside was cold and indifferent. The doors were closed, the cars sped by, the shouts chased it away. Max had grown used to being invisible. Then, amid the storm's noise, a tiny sound reached its ears. A faint, fragile sound, nearly drowned out by the rain and wind. Max stopped, its ears perked up, its whole body still. The sound came again, this time clearer. It wasn't a cat mewing, nor the whining of another animal. It was a cry, a baby's cry, sharp, sporadic, and broken. A cry of helplessness, lost and alone. A call for help in the black night. Max lifted its head, eyes fixed on the forest where the sound came from. Without hesitation, it lunged through the wet bushes, branches scraping against its body. Rain splashed into its face, and the muddy ground slipped beneath its paws. But it did not stop. The cry was calling to it, as if an invisible bond had connected the two beings, pulling them together. And then, after a few minutes of pushing through thick, damp undergrowth, Max stopped before a white styrofoam box, nearly covered by leaves and dry twigs. The box, muddy and misshapen from the rain, was moving slightly. From inside, the weak cry came again. Max approached cautiously, sniffing carefully. A scent overwhelmed its senses. Milk, the delicate skin of a newborn, the scent of panic and cold. It peered inside the box and its eyes caught a sight that made all its instincts surge. A newborn girl, wrapped loosely in a thin cloth, pale skin, blue lips, small trembling hands, eyes shut tightly. Max didn't know why the baby was there. It didn't understand why such a tiny creature had been abandoned in the forest during this fierce storm. But one thing it knew for sure, this child needed to be saved, and it had to be the one to do it. Without hesitation, Max gently bit the edge of the styrofoam box, pulling it out of the bushes. On the slippery ground, each step was an immense effort. The rain hit its eyes, the mud clung to its paws, its exhausted body protesting every movement. But Max did not stop. It dragged the box little by little, out of the forest, through the wet mud, heading toward the empty road, where it knew sometimes a car's headlights would appear and disappear in the night. Finally, after what seemed like a lifetime to Max, it pulled the box to the edge of the road. It stood there, soaked, stumbling, and then started to bark. A weak bark, but full of urgency. It barked every time a car's headlights appeared. But the storm was too strong and the cars passed by quickly, no one stopping. For many, the barking of a dog in the rain was just an annoyance to be avoided. As Max's barking grew fainter, it switched to whimpering and finally, just shuddering breaths. But it did not leave. Max turned back to the box, curling itself gently around it, pressing its thin body against the fragile styrofoam, shielding the baby from the cold wind. Its ears remained perked, eyes wide open, standing guard without a moment's rest. The storm raged on, but Max remained still, a sentinel without a command, but standing firm until the end. No one knew what had driven a stray dog, abandoned, hungry, and freezing, to do what even humans might struggle to do. There were no applause, no reward, no one witnessing it. But to Max, none of that mattered. Because perhaps some protectors are trained, but there are also those who are born to be protectors. And Max was one such hero. The moment Max saw the baby, a tiny creature curled up in the styrofoam box, with cyanotic lips and a weak cry that seemed to be fading, something inside it awakened. A faint spark ignited in the pitch-black night. It could not turn away. It could not continue searching for food like a stray animal anymore. From deep within, the protective instinct of a species born to accompany, to guard, to remain loyal, surged powerfully. There was no command, no reward, no hope that what it was about to do would be recognized by anyone. But for Max, this was something that could not be ignored. The rain still poured relentlessly, the cold drops like sharp daggers stabbing into skin worn by the wind throughout the night. The styrofoam box was soaked through, heavier with each raindrop seeping through its walls. Every time Max bit the edge of the box, it had to tighten its grip, hold it, and pull. 1, 2, 3 steps. The slippery mud caused the box to slide back, but it did not give up. With all the strength left in its exhausted body, it pulled again. The road from the edge of the forest to the roadside was short for a healthy person. But for Max, it was a journey as if climbing a mountain. Each pull was a battle against pain, hunger, cold, and fatigue, with exhaustion threatening to overpower its will. But it knew it had to bring the baby into the light. This child could not die, not in the rain, not in the night, and not while it was still standing here. The wind slapped its face, the rain stung its eyes. At times, the box nearly slipped from its mouth, and at times Max lost its footing and fell. But every time, it stood up, shook off the mud, and continued to pull. No one saw, no one comforted, but every second that passed was proof of the courage of a creature abandoned by life. Finally, Max managed to drag the box to the edge of the road. Occasionally, a few headlights appeared and then vanished into the white sheet of rain. It knew that was its only hope. Max stood in front of the box, lifted its head high, and began to bark. A hoarse, weak bark, but full of courage. It barked with every breath it had left, the bark echoing in the rain like a desperate plea sent out to anyone who could hear. The cars sped by. No one stopped. The storm still raged. Many people might see a dog in the rain as a threat or something strange to avoid, but Max stood there. When it could no longer bark, it whimpered, whimpers that tore at the heart, as if asking, calling, begging someone to stop and look at the lifeless styrofoam box beside it. No one came. Max turned back to the box, looking at the baby once again. The tiny hands still trembled from the cold, the cries now only a faint sound like the wind whispering through the leaves. Max understood. If it left, the baby would not survive until morning. It could not offer the child the warmth of a human. It could not comfort with words or with a soft blanket. But it had its own body. This thin body, though exhausted, still had enough warmth to shield it from the bone-chilling cold. Max lay down, curling around the box, holding it as if holding its entire world. It pressed its belly and side against the styrofoam, shielding it from the wind, the rain, and death. The rain still poured onto its back, making its body shiver with the cold. But it did not leave. It rested its head on the box, eyes wide open, ears perked, alert to every sound, every movement. A sentry, unwavering, untrained, without orders, but carrying an unbreakable heart. The night passed like this. The thunder rumbled, the wind howled through the trees, but Max did not sleep. It did not slacken. It had no strength to move anymore, but it still kept watch, still lived, still waited, waiting for a miracle to happen, waiting for someone to see. Perhaps to the world it was just a stray dog, nothing more. But in that moment, it was the whole world to a small, innocent life. And in that moment, Max was no longer a nameless wanderer. It was a protector, a warrior, the last hope of a life abandoned in the darkness. It is hard to describe in words what led Max, a dog nobody cared for, to perform such a great act. But sometimes their loyalty and love do not need reasons. They do not need to be taught. They simply exist, fierce and enduring, even in those who have been cast aside. Max did not know it could perform such a miracle. But when faced with life so fragile, like a thread, it did not choose to turn away. It chose to act, even if no one saw, no one acknowledged. Because for Max, that was the right thing to do. And sometimes, as long as one being believes in what is right, the world has hope. When the first rays of dawn broke through the still pouring rain, the whole town seemed to be gasping for breath after a night of howling winds. The sky was gray, the air damp and cold. Everything was covered in mist and water, with puddles reflecting the faint, pale light. But in the midst of what seemed like an ordinary morning, a miracle quietly unfolded, genuine, heartfelt, and profoundly human, beginning with the step of an ordinary woman. Grace Thompson, in her 50s, was a composed woman living a simple life. As on any other day, she left her small house before the dawn fully broke, heading toward the diner where she had worked for over 2 decades. But today, her steps were slower than usual. The storm last night had left everything in chaos. The wind still howled faintly, the leaves were still drenched and drooping, and Grace couldn't shake an unusual feeling of unease rising within her. As she approached the familiar turn near the highway, a less traveled area, she stopped. In the distance, amidst the thin mist, an unfamiliar shape appeared. On the cold, wet ground, a large figure lay still beside something white. At first, she thought it was the carcass of an animal, perhaps a mole that hadn't survived the night storm. But as she drew closer, her heart seemed to stop. It was a German shepherd, soaked through, its body thin with visible bones, trembling uncontrollably. But what made Grace freeze wasn't the creature's emaciated state. It was how it was curled protectively around a dirty styrofoam box, as though guarding something incredibly precious. Trash and leaves were stuck around the box. The box was soaked, dented, as if it had been dragged over a long distance. Inside, a faint cry could be heard. Grace knelt down, her hands shaking as she gently lifted the lid of the box, and then she held her breath. A newborn baby lay inside, curled up, shivering from the cold, its lips tinged blue, breathing in weak gasps. The thin cloth wrapped around the baby was soaked, barely holding on to any warmth. The eyes of the dog who now looked at her, were cloudy from exhaustion and hunger, but still there was a glimmer of hope, a small, almost sobbing bark, as if it was pleading with her not to leave. Grace didn't hesitate. She pulled out her phone, her hand trembling as she dialed the number. 911, there's a baby and a dog. I think the dog saved the baby, she cried, tears flowing uncontrollably. In just a few minutes, though it felt like an eternity, the sound of an ambulance siren shattered the quiet. An ambulance skidded down the wet road, followed by a police car. The medical team rushed to the scene, swiftly taking the baby from the box, wrapping her in special thermal blankets, urgently checking her heartbeat and each fragile breath. One of the emergency responders, after a quick assessment, looked up at Grace, incredulity in their eyes. This dog, it kept the baby warm all night? It dragged the box to the road? Grace nodded through her tears. I think it never left. It stood guard, then curled around the box as if the baby was its entire world. The dog, now no longer nameless, was wrapped in a thick blanket by the rescue workers and gently lifted. It didn't resist, didn't growl. It simply weakly looked up at the box, the place where the baby had just been taken. Grace reached out and gently stroked its head. You're a hero, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. A four-legged angel. A few days later, the hospital issued a statement that stirred the whole town. The baby girl had survived. Her condition was initially critical, severely hypothermic, dehydrated, and in respiratory distress. But after 3 days of intensive care, she pulled through. The nurses called her Mira, meaning miracle. As for the Baktidanang, now named Guardian by the media, it was being treated at a veterinary clinic near the hospital. They discovered old wounds on its body, likely from being beaten, along with severe malnutrition and acute pneumonia from being exposed to the rain for too long. But the miracle was that, despite its dire state, Guardian was still alive. Perhaps, like the child, Guardian too was a miracle, born from love and the instinct to save. As both of them gradually stabilized, Grace, who had witnessed it all, did something unexpected. She offered to temporarily adopt both Myra and Guardian. Not forever, she said, just until the world finds a better place for two beings that were once abandoned. And so, one peaceful evening after the rain, they returned to Grace's small home. 3 lives from 3 different worlds, now connected by an invisible thread called love. Mira lay peacefully in a small crib by the window, wrapped in a soft pink blanket. Guardian, still thin and weak, approached the crib and gently placed its head next to it, eyes half closed. Mira didn't cry. She just reached out a tiny hand, touched Guardian's fur, and drifted into a peaceful, absolute sleep. When the small door of Grace's house closed behind her, it marked the beginning of a new chapter for 3 beings who seemed like they would never meet. A lonely woman, an abandoned child, and a stray dog who had endured hunger and the cold. No one could predict what the future would hold, but from that very first moment, an invisible thread had been tied tightly between Mira and Guardian. A baby who couldn't speak, a dog who couldn't explain. But somehow they understood each other better than anyone else. On the first night in their new home, when Grace placed Mira into the small crib beside the window, the baby immediately squirmed and whimpered. It wasn't from the cold nor hunger, but from the absence of something. Guardian, still thin and shivering from the pneumonia it hadn't fully recovered from, slowly made its way toward the crib. It gently placed its head on the wooden edge and closed its eyes. Instantly, Mira stopped crying. She wriggled a little, reached out her tiny hand to touch the soft fur of Guardian's head, and fell into a peaceful sleep as if she had never known anxiety. From that moment on, a special ritual began. Mira and Guardian were always together. In the mornings, when sunlight streamed into the living room, Guardian would lie under the crib, eyes half closed, watching every breath Mira took. When Grace pushed Mira outside in her stroller, Guardian always walked quietly beside them, never straying a step, like a loyal shadow. And when Mira cried, no need for soothing, no need to rock the crib, just a light lick from Guardian on her tiny hand, and the crying would stop, replaced by giggles, as if only the dog could be the one thing Mira needed in this world. One day, while Grace was folding clothes in the living room, a burst of laughter echoed through the house, making her jump. She walked in to see Guardian with its wet nose, gently pushing a fluffy ball toward the crib. Each time the ball touched the crib, Mira burst into laughter, waving her little hands in delight. It was the first laugh Mira had made since the day she was saved. Grace couldn't hold back her tears. Perhaps Guardian didn't just save the baby, it helped Mira's spirit come alive. As time passed, the peaceful days in the small house were like a healing balm for all. Mira grew up in unconditional love, not only from humans but also from a heart silently shaped like a dog. There were nights when Grace would wake up, quietly stand by the door to Mira's room, and look in. In the dim light, Mira lay still in her crib, while Guardian always was there. Sometimes it lay under the crib, sometimes it rested its head on the edge of the crib, eyes half closed but ears perked, ready to wake up at the slightest movement from Mira. No one had taught Guardian to do this, but somehow for it, protecting the baby seemed to be the reason for its existence. Then one night, that strange bond saved Mira once again. Around 2 a.m., while Grace was fast asleep, Guardian, instead of lying still like usual, jumped up. It lowered its head to sniff Mira, then suddenly barked loudly, a bark not full of panic, but urgent. It ran quickly into Grace's room, jumped onto the bed, and grabbed Grace's blanket with its teeth, then barked repeatedly. Grace jolted awake, immediately following Guardian back to the baby's room. The sight before her froze her. Mira was turning blue, her lips were pale, and her breathing was shallow. Without thinking, she immediately called 911 and began performing CPR, following the dispatcher's instructions. Fortunately, the emergency team arrived in time. At the hospital, the doctors diagnosed Mira with a rare, severe allergic reaction that could have caused respiratory failure. If they had been even a few minutes late, the outcome could have been disastrous. When Grace heard the doctor's words, she could only squeeze Mira's small, cold hand, while her other hand rested on Guardian's head, which was lying beside her. "Again, you saved her," she whispered. Guardian didn't answer, but its eyes, always watching over Mira, were the clearest answer. The story of Guardian spread throughout the town, and soon across social media. Dog saves baby twice, four-legged angel, untrained protector. People rushed to the hospital, sending gifts, food for Guardian, and cards for Mira's recovery. But above all the attention, in that small, peaceful house, only three beings understood what was truly happening. A sacred bond had blossomed, an unspoken, unbreakable relationship. A few weeks after Mira had stabilized, Grace, who had initially only intended to temporarily foster the two small lives, made a permanent decision. She applied to adopt Mira as her legal daughter, and Guardian became part of the family. As she signed the adoption papers, tears fell from her eyes. Not from pity, but from a deep sense of gratitude for the great gift life had sent her. Beside her, Guardian sat quietly, unaware of what was happening, but somehow it must have understood that, in some way, it now had a real family. After Guardian saved Mira from the dangerous allergic reaction, life in Grace's small house continued peacefully, like the gentle melody of fate. Mira grew up healthy and joyful, while Guardian, though still bearing the scars from its wild past, had become an inseparable member of the family. However, the story of the hero dog didn't remain confined to the warmth of a home. It spread, being told on television, shared in community groups, and posted online. The townspeople began to see Guardian as a living symbol of unconditional love, not needing training, not needing words, just relying on instinct and the heart. Then one day, the town organized a charity event called Hearts for Hope to raise funds for orphaned children and abandoned animals. It was a sunny day, and the community center's yard was decorated with flags, balloons, and stalls selling homemade treats and recycled toys. In the middle of the lively atmosphere, all eyes were drawn to a small stage where Guardian, the fluffy dog wearing a red coat with the words "Miracle Dog" embroidered on it, lay quietly at the foot of the podium. Mira, almost a year old by then, sat on Grace's lap, smiling every time Guardian licked her tiny hand. People came by to take pictures, Pet Guardian offers snacks, and everyone marveled at the sweet image of the four-legged angel with the miracle baby. But just as everything seemed perfect, something unexpected happened. An incident that made the entire town's heart stop. And once again, Guardian became the hero no one had anticipated. Amid the bustling crowd, Guardian suddenly perked up its ears. It took a deep breath, its gaze fixed on something in the distance, near the backstage tents. A man was moving quietly against the flow of the crowd. Wearing dark clothes, his hat pulled low, he moved furtively, as if searching for something. His hand was hidden in his coat, his eyes darting about, and his every step radiated unease. Guardian let out a low growl, then suddenly snarled. No one paid attention. The music and laughter still echoed through the yard. But for Guardian, the danger was closing in fast. The man began moving toward the auction display tables, where fundraising items like wallets, cameras, and children's handmade crafts were laid out. He slowly slipped his hand into his coat, touching something inside. And in that moment, Guardian let out a sharp bark, then leapt off the stage, jumped over the fence, and charged straight toward the stranger. The barking was so loud that everyone turned to look. The man froze. A gun emerged from his coat, gleaming briefly, but before it could do any harm, Guardian pounced, sinking its teeth into the man's arm that was holding the weapon, pinning him to the ground. Screams erupted, children cried, and the adults shouted. Everything was in chaos for a few brief seconds. In the midst of the commotion, Grace hugged Mira tightly and rushed to the table, shielding the baby. A few young men attempted to intervene, but Guardian had already locked onto the attacker's arm, refusing to let go, showing no fear. Finally, two plainclothes officers attending the event rushed over, subdued the man, seized the gun, and handcuffed him on the spot. No one was harmed. Everyone was safe, thanks to a bark and a brave leap. The investigation that followed revealed that the man was a criminal with a history of theft and armed threats. His intent for bringing a gun to the charity event remained unclear, but everyone understood that without Guardian, the situation could have turned into a disaster. That same evening, news spread quickly across social media. The local newspaper ran a headline in bold. Guardian, the dog that saved the baby, now saves an entire town. Videos filmed by the townspeople went viral. Guardian was praised as a living legend. No one questioned it anymore. It wasn't just the dog that was saved, but the dog that saves. A few days later, the town held a small yet formal ceremony to present the Animal Bravery Honor Medal to Guardian. The entire town gathered in the square. On the podium, Guardian sat quietly as it always did, wearing a blue ribbon with a sparkling medal under the afternoon sun. Next to it, Grace held Mira in her arms, her eyes red as she stepped up to the microphone. Guardian wasn't trained to be a hero. It didn't come from a training center. It's not a police dog. But that night, when no one else could, it did what we call a miracle, she said, her voice trembling. Because of it, I have a daughter. And because of it, today, we're still whole. No need for words, no need for commands. Guardian teaches us that some loves don't need to be spoken. The crowd rose to their feet, clapping thunderously. Guardian remained there, ears slightly drooped, tail wagging slowly, as if all the praise didn't matter more than the fact that it was still here, by Mira's side, where it belonged. From that day on, Guardian was no longer an unknown dog. It was a symbol, a living testament to a simple but profound truth. Love, loyalty, and courage do not differentiate between forms or species. They can come from those once forgotten by the world, and it is these beings who save the world. Years passed quietly, like the gentle autumn breeze brushing past the windowsill of the small house by the town. From that fateful stormy night, when a scrawny dog sheltered a newborn baby in a styrofoam box, to the day the soft spring sun bathed the house in laughter, That journey became the most beautiful story the town had ever known. Guardian, the dog once unknown, was now not just a pet, but a living symbol, an irreplaceable part of the special family of three. Grace, the woman who had once lived a quiet life with simple routines. Mira, the child called a miracle by the very doctors who saved her. And Guardian, the four-legged angel who had saved the baby's life twice and sparked light in the hearts of both mother and daughter. No one asked about Guardian's past anymore, because its present was too radiant and its future full of hope. Under that roof, Guardian was no longer a dog that had been abandoned, but a true member of a happy family, where every glance, every pat, every smile was filled with love. When Mira started walking, Guardian became the warm pillow she rested her head on whenever she grew tired from playing. When Mira learned to speak, the first word she babbled was not mama, but gal, the tender sound calling Guardian on those warm, sunny mornings that filled the yard. Mira laughed and Guardian wagged its tail. When Mira cried, Guardian gently licked her cheek. No one taught them, no reason was needed. As long as Mira was there, Guardian was always by her side. Then, on the day Mira turned 2, Grace, after many restless nights, decided to officially adopt Mira as her legal daughter. The papers were submitted to the court. On the day Grace signed, Guardian was there too. It sat quietly at her feet, ears perked, eyes warm, as if it knew this moment was marking a significant turning point. When the red seal was stamped on the document, Grace held Mira close, tears streaming down her face. Guardian lifted its head and let out a soft bark, as if to say, family, finally complete. And to mark this special journey, Grace established a project no one expected, the Mira and Guardian Project, a nonprofit organization with a dual mission, helping abandoned children and rescuing stray animals, those beings once forgotten but deserving of a second chance. The project began in a small room at the back of the house, where Grace and a few close friends organized donations, gathered food, toys, and blankets to send to orphanages and animal rescue centers in the area. But within just a few months, the project grew unexpectedly. Other charity organizations began to link up. Local television ran reports. Social media shared images of Mira and Guardian, two living symbols of love that cross boundaries. A small center was opened, where photos of Mira smiling beside Guardian adorned the walls, where children were embraced and cared for, where stray dogs were bathed, cleaned, and played in the yard, finding new homes. Every morning, Guardian would visit the four-legged friends, though now older, walking slower, its eyes still sparkled like the first day it protected Mira from the storm. Then on a clear spring morning, the Animal Bravery Honor Ceremony was held at the town center. People gathered from all over. Guardian was invited onto the stage, no longer a stranger, but the hero in the hearts of the entire community. Around Guardian's neck was a dark blue ribbon holding a sparkling gold medal inscribed with the words, "For unwavering loyalty and courage, because heroes have 4 legs too." Grace stepped onto the stage, holding Mira in her arms, her voice trembling. Guardian wasn't trained to save people. It didn't wait for a reward, nor did it ask for recognition. In the moment no one was watching, it still acted. In the dark, it still held onto the light for a fragile life. Because of it, I have a daughter. Because of it, I believe that in this world, there are loves that don't need to be spoken. The crowd rose to their feet, clapping wildly. Mira, now old enough to understand, rushed up and hugged Guardian's neck, shouting, "My puppy hero!" The years that followed passed as gently as a spring breeze fluttering the windows. Guardian grew older. Its fur turned white around its muzzle, its eyes not as sharp as before, but it always watched over Mira's every step. When Mira ran around the yard, Guardian lay nearby. When she took her afternoon naps, Guardian lay under the bed. Each day was a silent promise. As long as I live, I will protect you. And then, on a clear spring afternoon when the white chrysanthemums had just bloomed by the fence, Mira, now 5 years old, lay on the grass behind the house, beside Guardian. She was reading a picture book, her tiny hand resting lightly on the dog's back. Guardian closed its eyes, breathing steadily, resting its head on the grass. No barking, no chasing, just perfect peace, as if the whole world was complete. "You still like listening to stories, don't you?" Mira whispered, gently stroking the thick fur. Guardian gave a soft grunt, its tail moving slightly, as if to say, "Yes, tell me, I'm still listening." And there, under the old tree, amidst the sound of children's laughter and the fragrance of flowers, a dog once abandoned found its final home, leaving behind a legacy not in medals, not written on paper, but etched deeply in the heart of a little girl in the town that loved it. Many years after that fateful night in the storm, Guardian, the dog once starving in the cold woods, the one that dragged a styrofoam box with a newborn baby out of the darkness, was no longer a stray. It had become a hero in the hearts of the town, a friend, a protector, a family member. To Mira, to Grace, and to everyone who had heard its story, time passed and Guardian grew old. Its back bent, eyes dimmed, and each step became slower. But the one thing that never changed was how it always stayed by Mira's side, as though the invisible bond between their hearts could never be broken by time. Whether it was sunny or rainy, Guardian still lay by her feet as she studied, walked beside her bicycle when she was learning to ride, and gazed lovingly whenever Mira introduced a new friend. Though its health declined, Guardian never stopped watching over Mira, never took its eyes off her, never abandoned its post by the door each night. Sometimes it would fall asleep, drifting into dreams, its legs twitching lightly as though running somewhere in its sleep. Perhaps it was running back to that rainy night long ago, where it all began. Or perhaps it was running around the yard with Mira, as they had when both were young and healthy. Then, one gentle spring morning, the kind with just the right amount of sunshine, just the right amount of wind, and white flowers blooming along the path, Guardian closed its eyes for the last time. Peacefully, quietly, it drifted into a long, eternal sleep. Mira, now 7, sat beside Guardian. She didn't cry loudly, nor scream. She simply held its large paw, pressing her cheek against the fur that had turned silver. "You were so brave. I love you so much," she whispered. Grace sat next to her, holding the two lives, one that had gone and one that remained. And in that moment, in some way, they were all still connected forever. There was no death, only a gentle farewell of a hero returning to eternity. The news of Guardian's passing cast a shadow over the entire town. Schools flew their flags at half-mast for the day. Families posted pictures of Guardian outside their homes. The local radio station replayed old news stories. The moment Guardian dragged the box to the street, the moment Guardian barked when Mira couldn't breathe, the moment Guardian jumped over the fence to stop the man with the gun from reaching the crowd. No one could forget that gaze, the steady gaze, full of unwavering loyalty. A few days later, the town held an official farewell ceremony. Not for a person, but for a dog. They erected a wooden stage in the center park, where Guardian had once played with the children. Beneath the canopy, white wreaths formed the words, "Thank you, Guardian." Hundreds of people came, from the mayor, teachers, doctors, to the children who had once played with Mira and Guardian in Grace's backyard. A small bronze statue was unveiled, less than a meter tall, depicting Guardian sitting, head held high, ears perked, its gaze looking forward. Beneath the statue, a simple inscription: Guardian, a hero in silence, a family in heart. Grace, in a modest gray dress, stepped onto the stage with Mira, now much taller, her hair neatly tied back, eyes gently sad. She spoke in a warm, slow voice. Guardian didn't come from a great place. It didn't bring a crown or certificates. It only brought its heart, a heart so big It could hold both a child and a woman who thought she would be lonely forever. We didn't just lose a pet, we lost a part of our family. But Guardian's legacy, its love, loyalty, and resilience, will live on forever. When she finished, Mira stepped up to the microphone. Her clear voice rang out amidst the quiet. Guardian was my first friend. He never left me, even when I was sick, even when other kids teased me. He listened to my stories. He understood me, even when I couldn't speak yet. I will always remember him, and I will try to be as brave as he was. I love you, Guardian. And the applause was deafening, not because of the speech, but because of a simple truth. Some heroes don't need to say a word, but they teach us a lesson that lasts a lifetime. Time passed and things changed, but Guardian stayed, not only in the memories, but in every step Mira took. Mira grew up, strong and compassionate. She took over the Mira and Guardian project from her mother, expanding the center into a statewide network. Hundreds of orphan children were cared for, and thousands of abandoned dogs and cats found new homes. In each room of the center, there was always a framed photo of Guardian Tunes, not as a mascot, but as a reminder that true love can come from the most unexpected places. And then, one afternoon, as Mira sat by the window of her office, watching the children play with the rescued dogs, she reached out to touch the small statue on her desk. It was of Guardian, with its warm gaze still looking toward her. Mira smiled, whispering, "Look, we kept our promise. We're still going for all the other guardians out there." Some beings, though they have no title, live like a song. Some stories, though they've ended, are still told like the sunlight streaming through the trees, soft, deep, and full of life. Guardian, a dog once abandoned, didn't just save a child. It saved an entire town from being forgotten, inspired thousands, and more importantly, taught the world one simple thing. Love is an action, and courage sometimes takes the form of a tail wagging in the wind. Years will pass, memories will fade, but there are stories like a faint light in the night that endure, transcending the boundaries of time, place, or any single being. The story of Guardian, the nameless dog once abandoned, wandering in the storm with its skeletal frame beneath matted fur, has now become a legend beyond the small town where it was saved. From Mira and Guardian's story, a wave of love spread far and wide, from small families to schools, from animal rescue centers to non-governmental organizations. They shared the tale of a dog not trained, but who saved lives 3 times, not for rewards, not for instincts honed through training, but simply because it could not stand still when life hung by a thread. Guardian may have passed, but the legacy it left behind has never faded. Its image appeared in children's books, in emotional education materials at schools. The story of the four-legged angel became a staple in ethics lessons, not as a distant legend, but as a vivid proof that true kindness can come from the most unexpected places. Veterinarians, those who had treated Guardian, shared at medical conferences. "We have never seen an animal as resilient as this. Even when its body was exhausted, it still kept watch until dawn, never giving up." The international media also reported. The magazine Life with Paws dedicated an entire special edition to document the entire journey from that fateful rainy night to the ceremony honoring Guardian. On the cover, a bold headline read, "When love is silent but fierce, the guardian of a miracle." But perhaps the most tangible legacy of Guardian lies in every action Mira, the girl Guardian once protected, continues to take each day. When she grew up, Mira didn't choose a life far removed from her past. She chose to live with it, alongside it, and for it. The Mira and Guardian Foundation that Grace once founded is now the leading humanitarian organization in the state, with 3 large branches, 12 shelters, and hundreds of volunteers. At every gate of the centers, there is always the symbol, an image of Guardian bending down, embracing a child in a styrofoam box, a symbol of boundless love. Every year, on the anniversary of the night the storm raged, the night Guardian found Mira, the foundation holds a grand event called Hope Day. On this day, hundreds of white balloons are released with messages of hope. Children hear the story of Mira's first four-legged friend, and abandoned dogs are adopted, continuing the cycle of love that never stops. Once, during a television interview, when asked, Mira, what makes you keep Guardian's image with you every day, even as you've grown? She smiled, not answering immediately. Then slowly she spoke. Because Guardian didn't just save me, it taught me how to live. It taught me that you don't have to be the strongest, the best, or taught to love or protect someone. You just have to choose not to leave. And it chose to stay when the whole world had abandoned me. Upon in that moment, the host fell silent. The audience wiped their tears because everyone understood that true love, no matter its form, always has the power to touch the best part of us. Back in the old town, the statue of Guardian is now where people stop whenever they need to find some trust in life. Children hold hands and take pictures. Adults bow their heads quietly, and sometimes someone leaves a flower, a small collar, or simply a handwritten note. Guardian, thank you for reminding us that kindness is never misplaced. Mira, now a mature woman with long hair like Grace's once was, still visits the statue every month. Sometimes she just sits there, placing her hand on the statue's foot, closing her eyes and smiling. Once she brought her young son along. She said, Son, this is Guardian. Because of him, I'm here today to hold you. The child didn't understand everything, but his eyes sparkled as he looked at the bronze statue. Perhaps, though he couldn't express it, the boy could sense the loyalty that had transcended death, the love that had become a legacy. And finally, when the story of Guardian was added to the curriculum, when people talked about the protector in the stormy night, no one remembered that it had once been a nameless stormy dog, wandering hungry and cold in the woods. People only remembered the most important thing, that there was a creature who lived not for itself, but for others, that there was a heart that never stopped beating until someone was safe. And that pure love sometimes comes from a tail gently wagging in the morning breeze. Guardian was not just a dog, it was the first chapter in the journey of a miracle. The first ray of light in the belief, the reminder that even if the world turns its back, there is always someone who chooses to stay, not because of duty, but because of love. And so, even though Guardian no longer exists in the flesh, its name has been etched into the wind. It touches the hearts of anyone who believes the smallest beings can change the world.